Hi, Michelle. How are you?
I'm good. And yourself?
Thank you. Good, Michelle. Michelle, what is your complete name and where were you born?
My name is Michele Lazarow, and I was born in Manhattan, New York City.
You were born in Manhattan?
I was.
What are your parents' names?
My mother is Phyllis, and my father is Harold Lazarow.
What did they do?
My mother has a beauty salon for 30 years. She was a licensed cosmetologist. Now she owns a salon. And my father was a shoe salesman with 3 shoe stores in New York City.
So you grew up in New York?
I grew up here and New York, Florida and New York.
You were flying back and forth?
No, I lived here till I was about 15.
Mm-hmm.
I was born in New York, came here when I was 3, raised here till I was 15. Then I went to New York until I was 31. Then I came back to Florida.
Do you know why were you born in New York?
My parents were there.
Oh, okay.
My parents met there and married there.
Oh, they met there?
Yeah.
So you grew up in what part of South Florida?
Hallandale Beach, Hollywood.
Oh, you've been here your entire life?
No. I was in New York and Florida.
Right. But you grew up in South Florida, you said?
Yeah, I grew up in South Florida until I was 15.
In Hallandale Beach?
In Hollywood, Hallandale.
Hallandale. What do you remember from your childhood?
Which part?
I don't know, 5 years, 6 years? Do you have siblings? Did you grow up, going around the neighborhood?
I have a sibling. He's 10 years older, but we were not raised in the same household.
Okay.
He lived with his father. I lived with my mother.
Okay.
We had different fathers.
Okay.
5 years old. Listen, when we moved to Florida, it was a very different time. It was 1970. I was 2 years old. My mother was a single parent. When we came here, single women had a very hard time getting credit. They were looked upon as divorcees. It was hard for them to get jobs. It still hadn't been the feminist movement yet. So she had a trouble even getting a place with a child, with a small child. So we were very fortunate. My mother was a hard worker. She came here when she was, when I was 2.5. She put me in nursery school. She didn't know how to drive. She didn't have a car. We rode bicycles. And we lived on the beach together in a studio apartment. It was a very nice time.
Your mother seems like a very hardworking woman.
She's a very hardworking woman.
Yeah.
Even today, at 85 years old, she still works.
Oh, she's 85 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. So what high school did you go to?
I went to Hallandale High School for a couple of years, and then I went to a Quintano school in New York City, a professional school for acting and different kinds of theater.
What kind of, do you remember what kind of things you were into when you were a teenager?
I was into, it depends on the teenage years. I mean, 13, 14, I liked going to the beach. I liked hanging out with my friends. I loved to go to the movies. I'd go to the movies every chance I got. I roller skated. I used to be a professional roller skater, taking classes after school. And then when I got into my adolescent years, I got into trouble like a lot of teenagers do. But when I moved to New York City, I got interested in comedy and theater, and I started going to acting classes, and I went to an acting high school, and it was a different, very different experience than a lot of kids.
You are a city commissioner nowadays. Do you remember when you were a teenager that you were involved into, public speaking, social things?
I never had anything to do with politics or the government or political. I never had aspirations for that. My life was theater, comedy, retail. I knew how to sell shoes because of my father. I worked as a bartender and a waitress, and I went and had my own store for a while. I had my own boutique for 7 years, and it was through my activism that led me to becoming a city commissioner.
Okay, so tell me why did you go to New York?
I went to New York for, you want the honest reason or the lies?
I would like the honest reason.
The honest reason was because I was getting into a lot of trouble in my adolescence. I was skipping school, I was hanging out with the wrong crowd, and my mother felt that it was time for me to go and live with my father.
Mm-hmm.
They had been separated since I was 2. And you know what? It seemed like a good idea at the time because I didn't really know, I never grew up with my father. I knew him, but only holidays, birthdays, on the phone. Mm-hmm. So I thought, okay, well, this is unusual to go to Manhattan. And I chose to go live with him. And it was kind of like a mutual, you have to go and I want to go. And my father wanted me to come because he really wanted an opportunity to spend some years with me, and he was retiring. So he actually was like a stay-at-home mom. He cooked my meals. He, waited for me after school. It was unusual.
What did you go to study in New York?
Well, I studied theater, and then I went to work in the restaurant business. I thought for years I would be a restaurateur, or I would open a shoe store. You know, I was trying to find my way.
Right.
And
How
then
old were you exactly at the time?
I worked, my first job was in Florida when I was 13.
Okay.
I managed Baskin Robbins.
Oh, really?
I worked in 13, and then they made me like a manager at 14, which pretty much killed my career because I was overwhelmed.
They made you a manager at 14?
Yeah, I mean, in the sense that I was like the senior employee because everybody kept quitting. And at that time, Hallandale was all seniors.
Really?
When I grew up, this was an elderly Jewish population.
Oh.
So, I mean, movies were $1.50, and, you know, it was a very, this was still a beachside, small community. There was very little, you know, young people here. So when you had a young person that was able to work, I don't even know what child labor laws are in Florida. It might even have been illegal. But I had my first checking account when I was 13, so I knew how to work, and I always loved working. And when I was in New York, I, during high school, got a job in a shoe store. So I did that for many years. And then when I started trying to find my way, I said, you know what, I think when I was about 19 or 20, I'm going to go to college. I'm going to try to go to college because I really didn't have those kind of aspirations. I was in theater. I was not very academic.
I was going to say, you went to New York because you were getting in troubles here in Hallandale. But New York is like the playground for teenagers. Isn't it even worse?
Well, I was living with my father.
Okay.
So there was no, you know, and he wasn't working. He was like home and,
so
you know. Yeah, he set your clock by the time you went to school, when you came home, you know. And one time I skipped acting class and he knew. Like my father caught me in every single lie. And I could get away with nothing. So
wow.
He was really like a disciplinarian. And my mother, you know, she was younger, she was a hippie kind of lady, so she had trouble disciplining me. Yeah, and my father was no problem. But you know what? It was what I needed, and it gave me, you know, it gave me stability, which I did not have. You know, listen, my father was alcoholic, which is a part, you know, I just don't think about it anymore, which I should. It's a big part of my childhood, and my father was very successsul. He had, you know, 3 stores, and he'd been very successful in the stock market. He was self-made. Wow. Came from nothing, you know, built a really nice, I don't want to say like, you know, fortune. It wasn't a fortune, but he did very well. But my father drank on a daily basis, and I grew up with a distorted idea of what an alcoholic was, because when they talked about alcoholism in those years, it was the bums in the street, the winos, the guys that were, you know, slovenly, had dirty clothes.
Yeah,
that's
the idea that most people have.
Right, exactly. You didn't think of somebody who was successful. But I am, you know, an adult child of an alcoholic, so I grew up with those issues, and I ended up going to therapy very, very young, and that was a big part of my life. It has been a big part of my life.
Yeah, most people have that idea. So you're saying that alcoholism, sometimes it's some people that are successful, like your father in life, and they just have this addiction, you know?
And it was, it's a family gene, and I had it also. For many, many years, I was an alcoholic and an addict and active. Because you're never really done with that. That's something you have your whole life. So when I say I was an active addict for many years, and I've been clean and sober for, it'll be 17 years. I got sober when I was 1999, so.
Well, your parents were separated, right? They weren't living together. For you, it was normal maybe, but do you remember any struggles growing up like that, seeing your mom on one side, your dad on the other side, or was it just normal?
No, when you grow up like that, that's all you know.
Right.
You know, and at that time it was unusual. But when I went to the homes of my friends who had mothers and fathers, it was, you know, they were being hit by their fathers. They were being, you know, they weren't being treated well, even if they had a mother and father. There were a few families that, you know, had a mother and father that were normal. They went to work, they had dinner together, but very few families, when I grew up and maybe even today, sat down at the dinner table together and talked about their day. You know, the mothers were working, the fathers were working, and And I was in homes where, you know, at the dinner table, children were getting smacked. I wasn't hit growing up. That was very traumatic for me to see. So in families that people would think from the outside, you know, were good, I felt mine was better. Where my life suffered, and I mean suffered in the sense psychologically, is that when you grow up an only child with a single mother that works, you're alone way more than you should be. And I believe that there were many kids called latchkey kids, and they wore their keys, their home keys, around their neck. That was the decade. The mothers were working and they were single, and so the kids came home after school by themselves. And that, I think, you know, I think that has a big part of the psychology of my generation. Anxiety, you know, fear of being alone. And I see that a lot in people in general, you know, this need to get married, this need to get out, you know, get out of their parents' home, get married, have children, you know, and set up that kind of life where you're not alone. And I think that stems from being alone. And it is traumatic. You know, when you come home day after day and there's no one there. I always felt that there was a psychology behind the child who came home from school and the mother was making cookies and they were vacuuming, and they knew that that was going to be a stable part of their life. When you have no one to talk to about your day because your mother's working and your babysitter's there, and you know, that's the kind of life that you grow up with, it's a different psychology that you kind of have to overcome.
Brad, would you say you feel comfortable being lonely, being alone, or you?
Let me tell you something. That to me is one of my greatest strengths. It is its strengths, excuse me. I have worked very, very hard to be able to not need to be with someone. And that is not a quality that I see in a lot of people. As I look around with many friends, many other women in particular, and men too, this fear of being alone is so prevalent in this society that very few people, it has taken me years to work on myself to be able to sit in a room and accept that maybe I will be there alone. I mean, it sounds depressing, but maybe I'll never meet somebody, or, you know, I made the decision not to have children very young. I knew very young that I would not have children. More and more women of my generation have done that. They have
Why did you make that decision?
You know what? It's something, it's funny, you know, I'm sure a lot of women listening to this are going to understand what I'm saying. There's a school of thought that says there's a maternal instinct. So you'll love them when you have them. You know, if you tell, at that time when I was, you know, growing up, people said, of course you're going to want them. You just feel that way now. You'll meet the right person and then you'll feel that way. But my life didn't go that way. And I think when you have a need to have children, that you make it a point to meet someone who wants to have children. People actively look for that. Because I didn't have that need, I didn't feel this pressure to get married, to find another person who wanted that. But you don't take a chance on the hope that you have them and that you're going to want them. That's a pretty big gamble. And what I see is people that had children that really didn't know what they were signing up for. And I see more and more women of my age group that have made that decision. And I think it's, you know, commendable. I think women, you know, instead of being looked at as odd, and I think that paradigm is shifting. That school of thought is shifting, that women are not weird now when they don't have children. It's just something, you know, maybe it was the way I was raised, that I didn't feel that I had that maternal feeling growing up. I do now. My relationship with my mother is the way that I feel that it would have been if she had been at a different time. And I don't think my mother was a bad person. She made the choices that she made because she had to at that time, as we all have parents that have. And I think the biggest problem for people is that they're stuck in that. They're stuck in what they didn't get, what they should have got. They didn't work through that. The anger, the disappointment. And I think that going back to the original question is I gave up those feelings, and so then I didn't feel this need or anxiety to be with another person because I've been able to work through a lot of those feelings. I'm a very, very strong person. A matter of fact, one of my good friends, maybe my best friend, Keith London, my colleague on the commission, says that I'm one of the strongest people he knows because I got clean and sober, so I don't drink. I used to smoke cigarettes. I don't smoke. I don't take drugs, even, you know, anything for a headache that's not over the counter, and I don't even get headaches. But I'm vegan. You know, I'm an activist. I have a very strong will, and I have a lot of fight in me, and that also has to do with my ability to be alone.
Yeah. Wow, that's very nice. So going back to New York, you went to New York. You studied acting.
Sorry if I went too.
No, please. I love
okay,
what you
I'm
said.
sorry.
I, really
I do that. I do that. I go off into branches like a tree. You have to pull me back.
You went to New York. You studied acting. You wanted to be an actress.
I did.
Wow. And where did you study acting in New York?
I studied at a school called Quintano School for Young Professionals, which was similar to the FAME School, which was the School for Performing Arts, which is the one that was in the movies. It was hard to get into that school, so I went to a similar school. And then I took private classes on the side and workshops and, you know, different theater groups. And that's a life that you have to really want. You know,
it's hard.
you have to want that above all else. And I wanted to be a stand-up comic because I have a natural, maybe not in this interview, but I do have a natural ability to be funny, which doesn't really go over well in government. They could use a little more of it, but it's funny because when you tell a joke from the dais, everyone's like, should I laugh? Should I not laugh? This is not really a 2-drink minimum kind of place, so they don't know, you know, is it appropriate? But
well, they say that comedians are very smart because they think 2 steps in advance than everybody else because that's how they get into the joke.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you have to have a wit. You have to have a mind that works like that. But my mother was a singing comedian. I forgot to tell you that. My mother was a singing comedian. My father was also in the theater. They had those aspirations. My mother worked with Sammy Davis Jr. and Buddy Hackett. She did the Borscht Belt. My mother has a reputation. Actually, that's how she's made her name in Hallandale Beach, is through her singing and her comedy. People didn't go to her salon for their hair. They went for the jokes, and she would sing.
Really?
And that is really how she created the name for herself. And I ran on my name, and I won on my name, Lazarow, because everybody knew Phyllis.
Wow.
So she has a true gift. And I like to think that I got that from her.
Of course, genes, right?
Yeah, I would hope so. But yeah, so I wanted to be a comedian and an actress, and you know, you have to really want that more than anything.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what brought you there? Well, what else did you do in Manhattan? You lived actually in Manhattan?
Lived on 86th Street.
Right.
Again, I mean, you know, I didn't have a path. I think also, you know, I keep going back to this, but it's, you know, I'm just turned 50. So, you know, my life is now almost half, you look at the half, maybe more than half over, but that halfway mark. And I see things now different than I did when I was 30, when I look back on my life. You know, when you grow up in a family with professionals, let's say a father who's a doctor and a mother who's a lawyer or government or whatever, and you sit down at the dinner table and you listen to the parents talking, you somehow get an idea of where you want to go. There's kind of a direction.
Right.
And when I grew up, I didn't have that. So I didn't really know which way to go. And I used to say, oh, it'll come, you know, something will appeal, but I could never see anything through to the end. You know, I would start something and then finish, and it didn't come. I had to actively seek it to see what it was I wanted to do, and I tried many things. It was, and I'm not a religious person, but there was a chain of events that happened that led me to where I am now, and I believe that was what was destined.
Right. No, I absolutely agree.
And I'll get into that, I'm sure, at some point in the conversation.
Right. What brought you back to South Florida?
My father got sick in 1997, and it became too much for me. I was pretty much his sole caretaker, and my mother was here with my stepfather. My mother was remarried since I'm about 9 years old, and they've been together 40 years. And my mother said, look, you know, why don't you bring your father here, and we'll get a nice place on the beach, and I can help you, and it will, you know, instead of killing yourself in New York and running back and forth in the subway in the cold weather. And even though he resisted, I said to him, look, I'm going. You can stay if you want, but I'm going. And at that point, he wouldn't have been without me. So we came back to Florida, and unfortunately he was only here, alive about another 9 months.
Wow.
And it was a shame because he said to me, I should have done this sooner. He really was enjoying his life.
You really connected with your dad when you went up there, even though you...
Oh, very much so.
Yeah, wow.
Very much
That's
so.
Very nice. What was it, your father's name again?
Harold.
Harold.
They called him Hal, but his name was Harold.
And what were the name of the shoe stores in New York?
Lido Shoes, Lido. And he had a partner, and then on the third store they closed, and then they each took a store and went their separate ways.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So you came back to South Florida because of your father. What did you do when you came here? What happened?
Well, we came, and then my father got sick, and I was very fortunate that he, left me some money. So I was able to kind of take a hiatus and figure out what it was I wanted to do. And I did some, odds and ends. I worked for my mom for a while, and then I traded some stock market, just trades. At that time, the market was doing very well. And then I decided that I was going to, I started selling jewelry to people, a necklace here and a necklace there. And it led to me opening up my own boutique. And so I opened up a boutique in Hallandale called Absolutely Fabulous. And it was over in an area called Schmata Row. And the reason that they call it Schmata Row is Schmata in Yiddish is a rag, a piece of clothing or a rag. And at that time, that street was full of vendors, and it was out, the stores where you would walk up and down the store, and there would be stores where you could buy clothes.
What's that area nowadays?
It's called Fashion Row.
Okay.
But we're trying to revitalize it in Florida, Hallandale, excuse me. We're trying to revitalize it in Hallandale. But what happened was the Aventura Mall opened. This is my theory. The Aventura Mall opened, and everybody went to an air-conditioned mall.
Right.
And that idea of walking in the Florida outdoors. And so I opened kind of when they were trying to revitalize it, and the economy was still good. This is when the economy was still good. And about 3 or 4 years after I was open, the economy started, tanking, and it was a struggle. And then I got involved in activism, and this new career started.
So when you came down to South Florida before you got into activism, you were a little like finding your ways.
Yes.
Right? How does that feel?
That's putting it mildly.
Right. I feel identified with that because I went through a similar thing.
Well, you did?
Yeah, sure. I think everybody doesn't. Well, there's people that since very young they already know I want to be an attorney, I want to be something. But something that you said about not seeing your parents and not having something to follow, I don't think it's because of that, because I went through a similar thing and my parents were at home every day. So I think just people find their own ways, easier than others,
It's true.
What were you feeling at those times? How does it feel to be in a place where I don't know what I'm going to do?
Terrible.
Yeah?
It's a horrible feeling. I think a lot of that, fear of not wanting to be alone is the feeling like I can't make it on my own. I don't have a career, I don't have a job, I don't have money, I'm going to need another person to take care of me, And, there were periods of my life where I felt that way, and there was, a couple of times where I was fortunate to have that happen, where a relationship worked out that way, and while I was trying to find myself, someone was helping me, pay the rent. But it's a terrible feeling to not know what you want to do because you have that instability, and that makes you fearful. And even today, I think I have a little of that, when I almost didn't win my election, well, what would I do then if I didn't do this? Because I do love doing this. More than anything do I love doing this. More than anything I've done to date. So if I didn't win, what would I have done?
Right.
Because that's where I see my life now.
What do you think you would have done if you didn't win?
I would have taken my activism to a different lobbying, probably a lobbying place, which I'm starting to do now with it. I've started to form 501c and 3s and 4s, 501c3 and 4, which are non-for-profit.
So let's start getting into your activism. You are very active about animal rights. And what do you think happened in your life that made you be that something so important for you?
Well, in college I was very involved in feminism.
Okay.
So I've always been very outspoken.
Okay.
I've always had a need to debate. I've always had a need to revolt. I've always had a need to, take the unconventional road. So that's in my blood for some reason. That's just the way I am. But it started because I bought a puppy in a pet store that was sick. And I didn't understand, what puppy mills were. And for me, don't lie to me. That's my thing, right? Don't lie to me, because once you lie to me, it's on. And I went into the store and I had asked them if this dog, because I had heard about these places called puppy mills, did this dog come from a puppy mill? And they lied and said he came from a USDA licensed breeder, but that's a puppy mill. So they didn't tell me the full truth. And then when he got sick, I did some research and I found out that he was from this puppy mill. And I said, this is a terrible industry. This is a fraudulent industry. It's criminal, because you're lying to people and you're costing them thousands of dollars in vet bills when the dogs get sick. And there's many other reasons why it's a terrible industry. But I started protesting a local pet store.
That's my start.
And then I started volunteering in the county shelter. Wow. And it started with dogs. It started with trying to stop stores from selling dogs, and volunteering, trying to make our shelters no-kill. And then from there, I started, opening my mind and realizing, I had a couple of people that were activists, and I would say, well, I eat animals. I wasn't even vegetarian. And then I went vegetarian. Somebody said, you really should be vegetarian. And then when I was vegetarian for a very short time, someone that I respected said, if you're fighting for dogs and you're eating pigs, then you're a hypocrite. Because you can't fight for one and eat the other.
Right.
And I really never made that connection.
Right.
And then once I made it, I was like, I'm vegan. Almost overnight, I went vegan. And then I started realizing that you're not just fighting for one animal's right, you're fighting for any animal's right, whether it's exploitation from, zoos or captivity or SeaWorld. It's all connected.
Can you explain for people that, because there's a lot of people who don't know, what's a puppy mill?
A puppy mill is a commercial breeding facility that puts the profit over the health and well-being of the dog. So you'll see these cages outside, if you've ever seen videos where they have these cages that are stacked outside, one on top of the other, and they just mass produce these dogs. They live in freezing temperatures, sweltering temperatures. They get no medical care. They never get out of their cages. The females are bred every cycle, and they're basically, they're just female, right? And unfortunately, as a result of these females breeding every cycle, the dogs get sick. They have genetic defects, and then when they're shipped on the trucks or the vans, they're puppies, and they're already compromised. They're what's the word? I can't think of it.
They're sick.
Yeah, well, they're sick, but their health is compromised, and they get the other dogs sick. So now they all come sick. And the owners of these stores know they're sick when they get them. So they usually take them right from the van to the doctor. The doctor's usually in on the scam. So the doctor stamps the health certificate, and they go back to the store, and many times the dogs aren't cured, and they're sold before they're really well. Some of them never get well. They come with parvo, which can be fatal. They come with distemper, which is almost always fatal. And then the problem is that they don't honor the lemon law, which is a state law that's been passed to protect the consumer when they buy a sick dog. So it's the consumer fraud part that bothers me. That's the part that bothers me. Yes, I absolutely care about the health and well-being of the dog. And I know our shelters are crowded, and that's all part of it. But the thing that angers me the most is that they are preying upon unsuspecting consumers with puppies. And these people are buying these dogs, and they're falling in love with them, and their kids are falling in love with them, and they're sick, and they put people through that. So that's the part of it that makes me really angry. I have a deep-seated anger to this industry.
Do all pet stores get puppies from puppy mills?
I have not seen a pet store in the country that doesn't. It's funny, there are very litigious group, they like to sue. That's their big thing. They try to sue you into silence. So, if I were to say, XYZ store buys from puppy mills, I could get sued because technically there is no legal definition of a puppy mill. So, when I present in front of a commission to ask for a ban, I have to say large-scale commercial breeding farms, right? So when you ask me, do they all come from puppy mills? I would say they all come from large-scale commercial breeding farms, right? But we know what I mean. Especially in Florida. We have about, at last count, 65 pet stores that are still selling dogs in an industry that's dying, by the way. If you look at the models now of pet stores like Petco, PetSmart, Pet Supermarket, none of them are selling dogs. They're all working on what's called a humane model. So they work with shelters and rescues, and they adopt out dogs and cats. But you're seeing more and more small stores, mom and pops that are selling specialty food. They're selling specialty beds and all these, and they're doing daycare and veterinarian services. And actually, it's a $60 billion a year industry. Okay, the animal industry is a $60 billion a year industry, and I should say companion animal, of which 2.3 billion or 2.9 billion are actually live animal sales. The rest of it is made off of food and veterinarian services. So the pet store that sells dogs is almost obsolete. It's a dying industry. But you have those, 60 stores in Florida that just refuse to give up that profit.
Right. And if a person wants to get a dog, what are the correct steps in order to?
Well, obviously, we always advocate for rescue first. I mean, I've got, 3 dogs, and they're all from the shelter. And I've got pet store puppies. Basically, I've got 2 Morkies, which are the designer breed. I'm sure they came from a pet store and probably upwards of $1,000, if not more. And then I have a Maltese mix who came from a shelter. And if you can't get a shelter dog and you don't want to go to a breed-specific rescue, so if you want a Maltese, there's a Maltese rescue. If you want a Shih Tzu, there's a Shih Tzu rescue.
Oh, there is those, yeah.
Yorkie rescue, there's specific breed rescues. And I would recommend, if you have to have a puppy and you have to have a breed, you need to go directly to the breeder. Go see the mother and father, go see where this dog was bred. And if they won't let you see it, then don't buy from them. And don't buy on the internet unseen, because that's where they're selling now. And that's a big part of the argument from the industry is, oh, well, if we don't allow the store sales, it'll go underground and they'll sell on the internet where no one's regulated. And I say, well, they're already doing that. And just because this one is wrong, we don't allow this and then say, well, this is okay because this is going to happen. This is not good either. The stores are not good. So you need to stop all of it, but we need to take the steps that we can take to do that. It's funny, I was, you mind if I tell the story?
Tell me. No, of course.
I get interviewed a lot for, on the news, about this issue. I've been interviewed for publications across the country because I led the initiative in Florida. That is how my activism started, was this pet sales ordinance. And the pet sales ordinance basically says that you cannot sell dogs in pet stores that are not from shelter or rescue. And when I got into office, well, actually when I started trying to pass it, I wasn't in office, I was just a resident and an advocate. I think at that time there were 10 cities in the country. Hallandale Beach became, I think, the 12th or 14th, somewhere in there. When I got into office, which was 2012, I was able to push the ordinance in, to date, 52 cities and counties across the state. We have 240 in the country, so we went from 12 to 240, not including Canada and Vancouver or British Columbia, all over there. But 52 cities and counties have signed on to this and said that this is what they want. And as a result of that, there's a target on my back. The industry is very upset, and rightly so. And I've been interviewed a lot, some good, some not good. And when I've had interviewers here, they go, they'll say to me, well, why dogs? You know, why don't you fight factory farming and the chickens and, you know, the cows? Why don't you try to make it better for them too? And I say, well, I would do it for all of them, but I can't make an impact on chickens, but I can make an impact right here in my backyard. And every argument that they have presented, we have countered with a much better argument. Their arguments are weak. So, you know, we just keep going, and we're gonna hit some real heavy times right now with this ordinance, and I am fearful. I am fearful that the pushback that we're gonna get is gonna be really ugly, and we're gonna have to hope that you know, that being right is enough, and that the officials will see that. And you know, it's funny because when I'm on Facebook or I'm doing my advocacy, and a commission, you know, anywhere an official votes against this ordinance or against an animal welfare issue, there's always the people, you know, like anything, that say, you know, we got these politicians and they don't care about animals and they're the worst, and, you know, they just talk about how bad the politicians are. And what I say to them is, then go out and vote or run for office. People need to run for office because we need more animal-friendly people in office. But to just sit there and say,
criticize, right?
Yeah, I mean, then get out and find out who the candidates are that are, if you don't want to run, get out and find out the candidates in your next election that are animal-friendly, and promote them. Because we've seen people, activists, that Sarasota County, the commission did not want to pass it. The girl who was leading the charge there waited 3 years for a new commission, but supported the two candidates that were animal friendly and helped them win. Sometimes, you know, I always say this issue is a marathon, not a sprint. You got to be willing to stay the course, and my life is very indicative of staying the course.
The ordinance is to prohibit pet stores to sell puppies. That's what
correct.
The ordinance is. What is the process for you to try to have that law, that ordinance into different places? What do you do?
Well, it's funny. You do it any way you would pass a law, you know. But I didn't understand government at all.
That's what I'm asking, because I don't understand either.
Well, I'm not going to get into the details of actually passing a law, but I'll talk about it from the 50,000 foot level. Any issue that's controversial, you know, there are some that are easier than others, but particularly animals are very hard to get welfare laws passed. It's how you present it, and it's who's making the money. You know, you have to look at, very few times is it about the animals. I hate to say that, but now that I'm in government, it's about the lobbyists, it's about the lawyers, it's about who's got more political power behind the scenes. So when people are under the impression that they can just run in with this great law to their elected officials and say, this is so great, and it seems reasonable and rational, and why wouldn't someone care about dogs and puppy mills? And they don't realize that there's all this other stuff that's going to happen behind the scenes. So, you know, when I was passing this law and I was very successful, some national animal welfare groups, big ones, had said, could you put your model down so we could use it? And I said, no, because there's no one formula. It depends on the commission.
I understand what you're saying.
Right? I got to know behind the scenes who's with us and who isn't. You got to do it, but when the industry doesn't hear you're doing it, you know, you got to know what lobbyists, you got to look at campaign finance reports, you got to see who's contributed to their campaign. I've had lobbyists kill my issue. I mean, it had nothing to do with the dogs. It had nothing to do with the fact that it was reasonable or rational, or every city around them passed it, or, you know, no argument that I would have presented. So when you ask me that, now, if you want to ask me, if you want to ask me how a law gets passed, we could talk about the process. But when it comes to animals, it's really horrible. It's horrible.
That's what most people relate to politics, right? Everything that you just described that goes behind the scenes.
And it starts, you know, it's funny because when I talk about it, they're like, just like the federal government, and I'm like, but if you can imagine. If you could imagine that it's happening, and I refer to Hallandale, you know, 38,000 residents, 4 square miles, the intensity of campaigns, and as you know, and maybe we'll talk about it, the corruption that's happening in Hallandale. Imagine if it's happening here, what is going on in the federal government. 100%, without question, there are corrupt politicians all over the place. It's a shame, because the American, United States, it's the government is so, I love it, and I love talking politics. I love discussing the Constitution. I love talking about how you make laws, and I love, I came into it very late, and I never was educated. I was a layman, and I didn't know a lot of stuff, and there were times that I had to ask questions. I felt like I was stupid, but I was a novice, right? So I didn't know, how do you make a law? What's the legislature? What's the House? What's the Senate? What's the difference between the Florida legislature and the federal government? The 3 branches of government. I mean, these are things that we learn in high school that I didn't learn. But I took it as much as I could as a sponge. I took as much in as I could. And I think it's really sad that, it sounds cliche, but that this is what we've turned into. I don't care if you're President Trump or Obama. I think it's a lot of, we know it's the people under them. It's the congressmen. It's the people that we're putting in office that are corrupt. People need to be more active in their local government, and they need to get more involved. And that's really what it's about. It's getting more involved.
Do you think that will help?
Oh yeah, I think people are totally disconnected.
Right.
Well, we talked about this, Oscar. When I ran my first campaign, my colleague and friend, as I said, Keith London, came to me and he said, "I want you to run for office because of the issue, because of the ordinance, because we had passed it, and it took me so long, and I stayed the course." He said, "I want you to run for office," and I said, "No way." Never. And he said, no, I said no. I mean, I always make a joke that he dragged me kicking and screaming by my hair. He said to me, "You're going to love it." He came into my store when I was working in my boutique. He said, "You're going to love it. You're perfect for it. You have the education, you have the intelligence, you have everything. And you're going to win because you're going to run on your name." Everybody knows Lazarow. And right out of the gate, you're going to get 1,000 votes. You're going to get 1,000 votes before you even knock on a door. But we started a grassroots campaign, and I ran my first campaign with $15,000 in the bank, which I had left over. I was able, to knock on 2,000 doors.
Wow.
And I ran during a presidential election, so people were coming out to vote. They were engaged more than they normally would be. My second election, I had a much harder race, and I had to run with over $100,000 in my account. That's the difference that the 4 years made, and I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that we were trying to do the right thing, and the people that were in power didn't want that to continue. So they spent a lot of money against me. They found people to run against me, and they were trying to get me out. But the first time I ran, I forgot where I was going. That's what happens eventually. If you talk to me long enough, I forget where I'm going.
Let me ask you about the campaign. You actually knocked on doors, the number of doors that you just mentioned?
I knocked on more in my second campaign. It's funny, I went to a government school. It was called Katie Sorensen, who was a Miami-Dade County Commissioner for many years. She had started a class called Good Government Initiative. And I was very fortunate to be in the 3rd class. And we talked about campaigning and how to run campaigns. And every politician that you talk to will tell you that the #1 way that you get elected is knocking on doors. It is the most effective way to run for office. And I knocked on about 2,500 doors. I think about 2,000. I can't tell you the exact number, but I walked and walked for months until I started like in June for a November election. And this election, I started walking before the primary. So when I went to the door, people thought I was on the primary ballot, and they were getting confused. Right. So I had to wait until, I wanted to start even earlier, but I had to wait until after the primaries, otherwise. But I love knocking on doors.
Really?
I love it.
Wow. Even when they're rude to you, because I imagine not everybody's nice.
Nobody's really rude.
Okay.
Because, you know, every once in a while you get this person that says, how did you get in this building? Because you have to be creative to get, first of all, we're very fortunate. Hallandale's very dense. A lot of our people are in condos. It's different when you live in a city that's got no density and it's house. It makes it a lot harder. But in a condo, you know, if it has 250 units and you can bang out one condo, right? So they'll always, you know, we always find a way in. But what they don't understand is that soliciting is not campaigning. And actually it's protected by the Florida statute. You're actually allowed to campaign. Now, I'm not going to fight with someone.
Of course.
If they open the door and they say, how did you get in here? I know every once in a while we'll accidentally knock on the president of the board, you know. But what happens is sometimes that, you know, when they open the door and they say, how did you get in here? I say, well, you know, we got in, somebody opened the door and let us in. And then they get upset. And I say, well, you know, I understand that you're upset, but let me tell you why I'm here. And most of the time people are happy to meet their officials. And then once you say, you know, most of the time people like to talk to us, that's why we're doing this. It disarms them. Because now they feel kind of stupid if they don't talk to you. Like, why wouldn't you want to talk to us almost, right? We're working for you.
For you, right.
And it's amazing because so many people will say, I'm voting for you because you knocked on my door.
Yeah,
You're the only one that knocked on my door, so I'm voting for you.
Right. Because they just know you and they don't know the other person, right? So,
and they know that you're working hard, that you're going to shake their hand, you're going to talk to them, you're going to look them in the eye, you're going to hear their concerns. And most of the time, whenever I've done that, I've gotten really good feedback later when people said, you knocked on my door, and, you know, or they'll send me an email and say, you knocked on my door, can you please, you know, tell me about this thing that's happening with the water bill, and I remember them, or I'm able to follow through on a promise that I made. And that's a great feeling.
Of course.
You know, it's a great feeling when you can do that and be a good politician.
Now I'm going to ask you about the city of Hallandale. I have two friends who live in the city of Hallandale, and before this interview I asked them, hey, what is your main concern? They both say the same thing. They are concerned that there is more construction that is going to create overpopulation, traffic is going to get worse.
Right.
What would you say to those concerns?
Well, now there's a technical answer and then there's a philosophical answer. All right. So the technical answer is there's such a thing as developers' rights. You know, that's there's such a thing as developers' rights, and there's a thing called Byrd-Harris Act. And what that means is that by state statute, if I buy a piece of property and I'm guaranteed these rights, and then you come in and down zone. So if I'm guaranteed 350-foot unit, you know, development, let's say I'm entitled, I buy a piece of property and they say you can build 350 feet in the air. Now the city comes in and says, we're not allowing that anymore. Now we're going to down zone that. We would get sued and lose.
Because it's against the law, right?
Correct. So what happened was...
You can't avoid them if they want to, right.
Right, I can't stop them, right?
Right.
But rarely do they come in the box, as we say. So usually they'll come and they need a variance for landscaping, or they need a waiver for their parking, or they need, you know, they don't just come with the height, they come with a lot of requests. And at that point is when you can say, no, you can't have that, no, you can't have that. And that is some way that you can stop that project.
I understand, right.
Now
it's not directly that you can stop, but you can stop through all these things that you're saying.
Correct.
Okay.
So I, you know, voted against a number of the new developments. This is not the vision that I had for the city. I know that we're no longer a beachside community, but I didn't want to be Aventura. That's why I came back to Hallandale. And, and so a lot of that had to do with the prior administration. And when I say prior, I mean in 2000, I want to say 2008, 2000, it might even have been earlier in 2006, the economy was stalling and there was nothing in Hallandale, and they were, at that time, the people who were in office were giving it away because they were trying to incentivize people to come and develop. So these developers' rights were started years ago. And you try to explain that to somebody when you knock on their door who tells you
the same issue, right?
Right? And then, you know, so I try to say to them, you know, I can't stop the development, but I try to mitigate as much as I can. And I voted against some projects that were really big and you know, that I didn't think was right for the city, were right for the city. And I do that when I can. You know, when I say to myself, this is too much. The problem was that the administration that I was on before, which was the mayor and 2 other electeds, were voting yes for everything. And I was in the minority. I mean, there were projects that came before us that were ridiculous, and I was the 4-1. And that's the problem, is that, you know, when you go out, you talk to people and they go, this commission votes on they vote yes on everything. And I'm like, well, it's not this commission, because I vote no. But people put everybody together. They don't look to see who actually voted.
They don't understand it different, right.
And I think traffic is going to be a problem. It's horrible everywhere.
Everywhere.
And it's not, and you know, we are also a pass-through city. So Hollywood just built, you know, 5 new high-rises on our border, right? Yeah. On our border, which everybody thinks is Hallandale. But it's not us, okay? But they use Hallandale Beach Boulevard.
My friend told me exactly what you're saying. We have Hollywood and Aventura.
Right.
And since those lines are congested, everybody gets down from 95 on Hallandale Beach Boulevard, and then we get congested, even though it's not people from here.
Correct. And you know what? I tell people, use the side streets, find the other arteries that you can, and there are arteries that you can get in and out of the cities that people don't learn. They don't take the time. They're like, yeah, I know, but I just don't. And I'm like, well, do it. And listen, I understand the frustration when, you know, it's horrible that it takes a half an hour to get from A1A to 95 in Hallandale. It's ridiculous. It should never happen. But you know, there's so many variables and factors that, you know, even if I could stop development, now I have to worry about Aventura and Hollywood, and you know, I can't stop all development. So what's smart development? And there's such a thing as, you know, listen, you know, my colleague used to talks about the mayor this way. You know, a developer used to come, take the plans, show it to the mayor, and she would say, I love it, when can you build? As opposed to saying, I love it, but what are you going to do for us? Right? Okay. So that's what this new administration, now that we have a new majority, is saying. If you want to come to Hallandale, give for my residents. You cannot build here unless you
give something back.
Give something to the community.
Right. Michele, what are your aspirations for this new term? What would you like to accomplish in office?
Well, my colleague, and I speak of him often because he was my mentor, right? So he's been in office a decade. So for years he had been saying that there was, you know, bad government, first of all, bad policies, you know, bad budgeting. And then he started to talk about corruption. And, you know, he was scoffed at, he was laughed at. He was in the minority, it's 4-1. And he would vote no on everything because he knew what was being presented was not accurate. And when I started watching the meetings and seeing what he was going through, I would sit in the meetings and I would say, this is horrible, right? This is terrible, because here's somebody who's trying to do good. You know, why would a person carry on like this by themselves unless he was an intelligent guy? He didn't stand to win anything by doing it personally. There must be a reason that he's doing this. And I started to see the collusion of the other 4, right? And I said, you know what, when he asked me to run, even though I said no, I thought, you know what, he needs some help up there, right? I live here, I'm invested, I want to have good government. And we sat up there together for 2 years, being the 3-2, right? But it's easier to say 2 are crazy than 1 is crazy. All right. So this election, I went out and found someone like-minded to run, and now we have 3 that are like-minded on this side. And I always am telling this joke now, I make this joke now, because since we've kind of we've got a new city manager, we've got a new city attorney. The city manager came in and said the budget is, you know, 10 million short, which is when we were using our reserves, okay? There are so many problems that the past administration was avoiding, was ignoring, was creating, okay, was creating. And now that we have this new majority, we are cleaning house. We are fixing the budget. I believe that Hallandale is on such a better track. I mean, we ran on a campaign of rooting out corruption. Whether you've seen it on TV or not, our vice mayor was, at that time, caught soliciting and accepting a bribe from a developer. And the new candidate, Annabelle Taub, that took his place, is run on the platform of rooting out corruption. And that's what we've done. And I think that it's a much more transparent and fiscally responsible Hallandale. And I really just want to take this city in a direction of honest and open government. I want to see us build responsibly. I want to see seniors and children and everybody enjoying the city. And there's people that are going to be unhappy. There's programs that are going to be cut. We're putting $58 million into new parks. There are many, many things happening here, and I feel like we could really leave a legacy. If we could stay on this track, it would be really good to turn things around here.
Thank you, Michele.
You're welcome.
For this interview.
Thank you.